This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources. Consistent with its Running Right process, Alpha is an energy company committed to being a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward. We fuel progress around the world. More information at alphanr.com.
Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, on Midlothian Turnpike in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Taking it to the streets and helping our community. Intelligent Illuminations. We make streetlights smart and give you control, providing secure point-to-point wireless solutions for roadway and area lighting, helping you manage, monitor, and control your streetlights. More information at ilooms.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com.
It's amazing what my students with special needs can accomplish. Their pride is priceless. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and a welcome back to Secretary of the Commonwealth, Levar Stoney. Appreciate your being back with us. We talked with you last year, and you were talking about what was happening then, so we're really interested in getting an update on the key areas that you're working in and what's happening. So start out on any one of them that you'd like to start with, Levar.
Well, David, thanks for having me back. Obviously, last year was another busy year in state government, and I survived. So that's what matters the most. But number two, we're back at it again. And as you know, the appointments to boards and commissions are at the top of the list once again this year. We're looking at a great amount of applicants who've applied for a number of boards. We'll have nearly 1,900 or so this year to actually appoint. And I've already gotten around the state to pump up, you can say, a lack of better words, for pump up, the interest in board appointments. Obviously, folks are very, very interested in serving on boards of visitors across the Commonwealth, at all the institutions of higher education. But there are a number of other boards that are coming up, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, the Board of Health, once again. We're going to continue to make the governor's imprint on state government. The governor has sought to have a very, very inclusive state government, and we'll do our best to add more and more diversity to the boards and commissions, from gender to sexual orientation to ethnic background. We're going to try our best to diversify the governor's board appointments this year once again.
There was one other area that you talked about in diversification that you didn't just mention that I recalled your naming a year ago, and it was the first time I think I'd heard a Secretary of the Commonwealth say it, and that was age. Because you said that you were going to be working to make sure it wasn't just older people or middle-aged people, but getting younger people in on the boards.
That's
too.
Exactly right.
And
we've done, Dave, we've done a really, really good job at that. There are a number of, and sometimes these board appointments, some of the boards and commissions that people end up being on can be a little obscure, and we talked about that last time. Yeah. But there are valuable places for young folks to contribute. And I thought last year we did a really good job in adding a lot of millennials to boards and commissions. And, here's how I think. I think these millennials will be the leaders of the future. And so why not get your feet wet in state government before moving on to possibly running for state office or another higher appointment as well? you never know. And so we got to start somewhere, and I think getting more and more millennials involved is still at the top of the priority list.
And, you know, I can't remember if I asked you this a year ago or not, but I'm not sure that there's even an age that one has to be, like you have to be a certain age to run for U.S. offices, but so someone maybe in college who would very much qualify and could have interest. And we're going to make sure that throughout the show we put your website up, because that's the place for people to go, and then they can click on that link that takes them to the appointment opportunities for 2015. So they could be someone, I'm not sure about high school, but certainly in college they would qualify.
Well, you know what? I did recently, last year, we did appoint a high schooler to, I believe was the Foundation for Healthy Youth, and it was Marshall Dindy. You may know Ben Dindy,
yes,
who is an advocate down here on Capitol Square, but his son, Marshall Dindy, was appointed, or maybe it was actually born in volunteerism. That's what we appointed to. We're trying to look for as many diverse perspectives as we can add, and I think, you know, you're right. There's not an age requirement. I was over at I was in Northern Virginia a couple weeks ago, and I spoke to it was the George Mason University School of Public Policy's Alumni Association, and there were many millennials who were in the room, and I tried my best for those individuals who lived in the Commonwealth of Virginia to apply for a board of commission. Here's the thing: we need more and more younger people involved in government and politics, and in a time where you see all the gridlock that's going on in Washington, D.C., and sometimes some of the gridlock that happens here in Richmond, I think we need a new, fresh perspective to actually pursue politics and government. And getting involved at the board appointment level is probably the proper place to start.
And while these boards, for the most part, I think I'm right, you'll correct me if I'm not, don't really pay a compensation, they do cover expenses. So if someone's out in Central Virginia, Northern, Southwest, Hampton Roads, and if the meeting's going to be here in Richmond, they would get their expenses reimbursed.
That's correct. We will cover your travel expenses. Unfortunately, we will not cover anything else beyond that.
Yes.
But, you know, it's a volunteer job. It takes passion and commitment and follow through at the end of the day. We want those individuals who want to contribute in some substantive way to the Commonwealth. And I understand there are a lot of folks out there who live out in Southwest Virginia or Southside Virginia, or you may live in at the top of Virginia, or Winchester and Clark, and those are tough drives. But we will cover your expenses in order to get there. And here's the thing: I know that the folks who live in Southwest Virginia are closer to 8 other state capitals than they are to Richmond. However, coming to serve your Commonwealth will go a long way for your community, and go a long way for yourself as well.
And you even talked about doing something like this before, maybe even running for office or something. Not that people would have the primary purpose of doing it as a resume builder, but still, for a young person to serve on a board while in high school or in college or in graduate school, that's something very significant that others would look at and say, oh, you've been involved.
That's right. Here's the thing: we're not looking for those people who are looking for a resume builder. I mean, well, we get a lot of those applicants, and we can see those right away. We're looking for those folks who really want to contribute to the conversation on policy and on regulations. There are a lot of applicants, so the competition is tough for a lot of these boards. But I think our team over the Secretary of Commonwealth's office, including Lena Westfall, Denise Burge, Jennifer Sy, and Kelly Thomas and Mercer, do a great job in vetting each and every candidate we have in the who comes through the application process, and hopefully we pick the best person to serve. And we look for those. Those are not requirements of ours. The diversity stuff is not a requirement of ours, but it's our best to make sure that each commission and board looks more and more like Virginia, a diverse state.
So what would you say to someone who maybe applied last year and didn't get selected? Is their online application something they need to refresh, or?
You don't have to refresh. Your application's still in the queue. What we'll do is consider all the folks who applied this year with the folks who applied last year as well. and we'll begin the vet process once again. And there's a good chance you'll probably get a phone call letting you know that we still have your application on file, that we haven't forgotten about you, and we're going to consider those 3 appointments that you asked for last year. What I tell a lot of folks, though, who, that maybe they don't fit in the 3 categories that they actually asked for, those 3 appointments. If you emailed me, emailed my office, soc@governor.virginia.gov, I think there's a possibility we can fit you in somewhere else. We limit to three choices on the application, but I know folks are talented and bright that they can serve in other capacities as well.
So that's SOC
at governor.virginia.gov.
Okay, that's an easy one for them to remember.
That's my hope, all spelled out.
Take that out. Before we would leave the area of appointments, refresh people's minds about the type of boards, because some of them really are almost like are passing regulations. Others are not.
That's right. There are advisory boards that are basically as the direct liaison between the public and the agency, with a lot of public interest and will watch over public concerns. So it's an advisory board capacity. So no decision making really decisions are being made there. Mostly it's an advisory capacity for the citizen. Number 2, we have policy boards, or policy-making boards and commissions. These commissions will promulgate policies, will create new policies, and they also do a lot of oversight as well. And number 3, the supervisory boards, which actually will hire an agency head and actually basically run an agency, almost like a board of directors does for a company. And so those are the 3 main boards right there. Both are very, very interesting. And they all 3 call for different sort of commitments in terms of time. Some actually you're just a quarterly meeting. A lot of advisory boards are just quarterly meetings, 4 times a year. Many of the policy and supervisory boards, though, are monthly meetings. So it's a 12-time-a-year thing. For instance, if you're in a state board of elections, it's more than just 12 times a year. It's more than likely every time there's a state board, there's an election, you're going to be involved in it. And so it calls for a big, big, big commitment. Another board with a big commitment, the nursing board, Board of Nursing, and also the Board of Medicine. Also big, big commitments, because there's a lot of case study that comes along with it, a lot of cases that come before those boards, and a lot of decisions that will need to be made.
Well, I think you've certainly given people a good, not just a refresher, but some updated information on that, and I hope that the inbox gets crowded with good applicants.
Oh, they always do.
Yeah,
they always do.
I'm sure they would. Now, that would be enough if that were your only assignment as Secretary of the Commonwealth. But there's several other major areas, and one of them has to do with restoration of rights. How is that going? What's that process like now?
Well, I'll admit, coming into the job as Secretary of the Commonwealth, I didn't know very much about the Restoration of Rights program in the governor's office. I've come to learn a ton about it, and actually it's become somewhat of a passion of mine. Right now, the governor has restored the rights to about 6,400 individuals. These are people who formerly had records, criminal records. And now these folks have the right to vote, the right to hold public office, the right to run for public office, and the right to be a notary public. Over the last year and 4 months, you can say, we've done a couple things. Number 1, now an individual can find if they committed a more serious offense, you can find that serious offense on our website. So now you'll know whether or not you've committed a more serious offense or you have a nonviolent offense on your record. Number 2, what we've done is we've reduced the wait time for those more serious offenders from 5 years to 3 years. So no longer a person has to wait 5 years to actually petition the governor to get their rights back. Number 3, we made all drug offenses nonviolent offenses for the criteria of restoring one's rights. So that was a big that showed a big bump in our interest in our program, and we got a lot of folks in the system because of that. And number 4, no longer will a more serious offender have to complete a 13-page application to actually apply to get their rights back.
13
pages.
Oh,
with a letter from the governor. Also, it needed to be notarized as well. All these additional steps that we thought were unnecessary. What we want to do is give folks a second opportunity, a second chance at life and at being a citizen. You don't know, David, how many people we see or talk to on a daily basis who cry, scream, yell for excitement that they're getting their rights restored. And I think that's pretty cool, pretty awesome. 400,000 individuals in the Commonwealth of Virginia, voting age individuals, are disenfranchised. That's a huge number, one of the largest amounts in the country. That's 7% of the voting age population and 20% of the African American voting age population disenfranchised. 6,000 or so individuals is just a drop in the bucket, but we're doing our part. The governor talks daily about building a new Virginia economy. We also believe that in order to build that new Virginia economy, you also have new Virginia values. And one of those values is redemption and mercy. And the governor puts those actions puts those values into action every single day.
You know, there are states where it's almost automatic.
That's right.
When you have served your time and you've whether it was time or fines you had to pay or whatever you had to pay, that it was.
Yeah, in Massachusetts and Vermont, those are two examples where a person never loses their rights to vote or to hold public office. Even folks who are currently incarcerated in those states can vote. I'm not saying we need to do that, but I think our state government should look at an automatic restoration of one's rights. I know there are a couple of pieces of legislation that passed out of the Senate this past year that would allow nonviolent offenders to actually participate once again in society, get their right to vote back. But it did not pass in the House of Delegates. So we're moving forward. At least we got one chamber to pass it this time around. Hopefully in the future we can get more and more people from the General Assembly to actually support such pieces of legislation.
You know, with the difficulty that people have in getting employment who've been incarcerated, I would think that if I could say to a potential employer, I've got my rights restored,
Right.
It would even help someone in their effort to try to be employed.
Yeah, it gets to, it's a step in the right direction. It gets their foot in the door. You show that grant order signed by the governor to an employer. It shows that you've taken the initiative to actually to participate and become a member of society. And here's the great stat right here. When we announced back in December that we had restored the rights of 5,100 people at the time, 70% of those individuals had registered to vote. And we all know that once a person is registered to vote and is participating back in society, it reduces recidivism as well. And so we see it's a win-win program for us. There is a stigma, or you can say a scarlet letter, that an individual wears when they've been convicted of a felony in their past. And our job is to erase that scarlet letter and provide folks an opportunity to feed their families. At the end of the day, these folks want to get back into society and be contributing members of society so that they can actually not only participate in civics, but also feed their families and be a model for their families moving forward. I think that's the sort of individual we want here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Excellent. Lobbyists file and report to the Secretary of the Commonwealth, and the emphasis in the last few years on ethics reforms, that somehow impacts that whole process as well. So our viewers probably be interested, because sometimes when they hear the word lobbyist, they think of Washington, D.C.
Yep.
But tell them some about the process here in Virginia.
Yeah, any lobbyist who plans on coming to Richmond to advocate on any sort of public policy or public piece of legislation has to register with the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office. And we have a fellow in our office named Chris Fink, who's been around for a long time, and he may be laughing about this, but he knows it in and out, and he has been the face for lobbyist registration. And I believe we changed it to twice a year now that a lobbyist has to register. But it's interesting to keep track of how many people come to Capitol Square to advocate on any sort of issue. I mean, you name it, from the advocating on behalf of the state song or a new state song to or on energy policy. We have a ton of people who come here to Virginia to actually to lobby and advocate. And our office does a lot of the tracking of the paperwork. You can say that. The one thing about the Secretary of Commonwealth's office that I figured I knew a little bit about, but was the amount of paperwork that the office tracks. And we track I'm not a big paper fan, especially since we have so much in terms of technology that we can use today. But there's a lot of paperwork involved and a lot of signatures to be had as well. And we have a great team that tracks that on a daily basis.
Because you have some other areas that you also have
Service
paperwork.
of process,
Yes,
a lot of paperwork
yes.
there. The authentication of documents as well, a lot of paperwork there. But my team, I wouldn't be anything without their hard work and effort, and they've made sure that we are on track to hit all the goals that we've set forth at the beginning of this year and beginning of last year. So they keep the paperwork to a minimum, but because they're very, very, very organized.
One of the improvements that your immediate predecessor made was the applying online.
Oh, that's right.
And I think that really, it's hard to imagine how the amount of paperwork when everyone was not doing anything online as far as seeking to get an appointment, I'm referring to.
Yes.
And with now that, I think that's pretty much the exclusive way, unless they send an email to SOC.
Well, no, Dave, I've seen the old ledgers, you can say, basically books with pages upon pages on board appointments, and it's amazing. Even now, the Blue Book isn't even on; is online now, and not even made in a hard copy fashion any longer. So more and more, we're trying to streamline the process and actually become more and more efficient and use less and less paper. And I think it's probably where a lot of our agencies and state governments going towards the future.
You know, some of us old timers have copies of what you refer to as the Blue Book.
The Blue Book, yes.
Now some of the newer people may be saying Blue Book. What? So it is online. It's on your website.
We're
but
working on it right now.
Tell them what they find in what is the Blue Book?
In the Blue Book, you'll find every single board appointment that was made in the year 2014, and a description of the governor's cabinet. It's basically a big description of government in 2014, a snapshot, and it will contain secretaries and the governor as well, and the AG's office as well. It would just give a really good snapshot on what government looks like, and all the organizational charts for every single piece of government. You know, the organizational chart for every agency and secretariat. It's a really, really interesting document. It's too bad that we don't make a book any longer, because I have a ton of those books in my office right now from years up to the 1980s. And I say 80s as if it's a long ways away. It was 30 years at least. But it's a great example where you can look back and see a person, maybe a friend of yours, or maybe David Bailey might be in there, which you are, I know, in there, and it shows what the person did in that particular year. It's a really, really cool snapshot.
Yeah. I will say one of the nice things about the online, they're searchable.
That's right.
So if you were looking for Levar Stoney, you search that, and then it takes you can find the pages where you are.
Now that was tough to do maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, the index would maybe give some key things, right, but not as easily to find information. Before our time's up, anything else over in the Secretary of the Commonwealth you want to let people know about?
You know, one thing I'm working on as well, David, is sticking to the social justice piece of on the governor's side of things. That is, besides restoration of one's civil rights, I'm working with the governor on the possibility of bringing ban the box to state government. We have been looking at it behind the scenes internally on whether or not the state government could actually do a more fair chance policy, allowing or basically deleting the box that says, "Are you a convicted felon?" from the state government applications. Something we're taking a look at. Once again, trying to erase that stigma and that scarlet letter that ex-offenders have to carry around moving forward.
In today's news, I think I saw maybe where the city of Stanton was looking at
right.
doing that, and a couple of cities have removed that from their local government employment.
Yeah, 14 cities already have removed it from their city government applications, and who knows, state might be the 15th. I know Georgia, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, was the first state in the South. And the governor's going to be very, very upset when he hears about that. The first state in the South to actually remove the box from any state government application. So we hopefully will fall in line here soon enough and become a part of that mainstream here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but also in the country.
So we've missed out on number 1, but we have a chance to be number 2.
Yeah, that's a chance to be number 2.
Harder,
We're working towards it. We'll see what we can do.
Levar, thank you very much for being
Thank
on
you
This
so
Week in
much.
Richmond, and we look forward to talking with you again.
I appreciate it, David.
Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources, a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward.
Haley Buick GMC in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Intelligent Illuminations, helping you manage, monitor, and control your street lights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.